Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we're joined by Karl. Karl, former student of mine, is always great to reconnect with my students there. So, Karl, maybe you can tell everyone watching a little bit about your background. I know you've done lots of work in immigration and became a paralegal afterwards, which is very interesting. And do a quick summary. And thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Hi, JP. Thank you for having me.
How
Hello.
are you doing, Karl?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Is it delayed or?
Yeah, no, I can hear you now. I can hear you.
Perfect. So Carl, thanks again for joining us. You can tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into becoming a paralegal.
Okay. Well, prior to becoming a paralegal, I've been a licensed immigration consultant for 9 years. Never wanted to become a paralegal, even though I've been married to one and around paralegals for a long time. It is actually on a visit to one of Laurie's colleagues and one of your colleagues as well, JP, Leon Pressner's office, that I walked out of there saying, wow, paralegals can do all this stuff. And Leon does a lot. I was really impressed. 2 months later, I enrolled in Centennial's program because of him. So Leon was really the inspiration for me to become a paralegal. At that time, I had no idea what area of law I wanted to practice in. But over time, I decided it was going to be POA and to certainly look at the tribunals for from the IRB. So there are four divisions. There's the Immigration Division, the Immigration Appeal Division, the Refugee Protection Division, and the Refugee Appeal Division. Those are areas I think paralegals have not tapped into effectively the way they have with, say, landlord tenant. If you mention landlord tenant, you'll never hear anybody talking about a lawyer. That's the paralegal's domain. And I think that's a huge opportunity for paralegals to get into.
So, what are the kinds of things then that paralegals could do at the board, right? Because we hear certainly when the word immigration and paralegals come up side by side, we're looking at battles, in the court of appeal about scope and are you allowed to do this and why can't you do that? So, is there enough there for paralegals when we look at immigration? You mentioned the four boards. So, what can paralegals do, and what are some of the work you've done, respectively? I mean, I know you also have the immigration consulting piece as well. But as stuff within only a paralegal scope, what are the kinds of things they can do?
Well, in the paralegal scope, well, I I don't practice refugee law at all, right? Laurie does that. But you can represent people both in their refugee applications as well as their refugee appeals. On the IAD side, which is the Immigration Appeal Division, you can do spousal appeals and you can also do loss of PR appeals. And there are a lot of people who get permanent residence, and I can't explain it to you. I don't understand it, why they don't become citizens, but they don't. And they will spend 4 or 5 years out of the country and then come back to Canada. I recently had a case with a guy, he left here from COVID and went to Jamaica and fell in love with a lady and decided not to come back until he got sick. And of course, they let him in and then they issued a removal order. And now you have the appeal. All right. So paralegals can do that, do those appeals. Um, and what I find is one of the greatest sources of referrals are other legal professionals, including lawyers. There are some lawyers who send business to me. They just say, "Hey, Karl, that's not my thing. That's not my area of expertise. Don't want to do it." Right? So I think networking with other professionals is important. However, even more important is really searching out the mentors who can teach you this stuff. I think that is key. I was very fortunate because my mentor, Roy Kellogg, used to be a hearings officer. So when I was doing my field placement with him, I was going back and forth to Victoria Avenue downtown to the IRB there and doing a lot of stuff with CBSA. So it became almost second nature for me.
Yeah, so you talk about mentors and mentorship and coaches and advisors, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I was looking at over the last week, I mean, I've been looking at it really since I've been teaching paralegals, right? Is the percentage of paralegals who are licensed but who are providing legal services, and that number, pales in comparison to lawyers who are licensed and working in the legal field, right? So you mentioned mentorship. What else can, I mean, again, you've been, you were in my classroom, I guess, a year or so ago. So what can you share about, the steps of once you pass the licensing exam and getting into the practice? You mentioned, I think, agency work, right, as well. So what can paralegals do to kind of thrive, in the initial steps in building up their businesses?
Okay, well, I'd say if you're gonna set up a paralegal practice, um, pick one or two areas of law that you're passionate about and that you want to learn because I realize you won't become competent until you practice. And you need the mentorship and the guidance. So like on the POA side, I was fortunate during my field placement because I built relationships with two people. One was a prosecutor, so I was going to court with her and learning POA from the prosecutor's point of view. And then there was a defense paralegal in POA, a former police officer, who I learned it from the defense point of view. So I really got um a good view of both sides of the coin. So by the time I got licensed, I just started doing court appearances for that paralegal, the defense paralegal, agency work. And he'd say, hey, Carl, you know what? I have all of these court dates. These are the resolutions we want, or call the client and discuss the options with them. And that is how I learned it, right? So I believe same with landlord tenant. If I wanted to do landlord tenant, I already know who I would talk to who is actively practicing. And I find in this profession, people are willing to mentor you and share knowledge. That's a fact. It's one of the things I love about this profession. People are willing. There is so much business out there for everybody. So I can't understand why so many people get licensed and are not practicing. We also need to think outside the box. We don't always have to get a job in the courts or in a paralegal firm. There are so many different um sectors that need paralegals that I think people aren't paying attention to.
Now, I mean, we could certainly go in that direction there, but I do want to talk about some of the immigration stuff that you do. So, of the stuff that again, either in the scope for paralegals, or as your RCIC that you can use, what in particular are you noticing, or are you noticing? Is there a kind of a recession proof, in immigration right now? There's been all sorts of changes, numbers and things like that. Are you finding? There's certain areas that are thriving still, or what's kind of your practice? What's the bread and butter that you're getting?
Bread and butter of my practice has always been family. Um, and the simple reason for that is yes, I'm sure government policy can change. However, family sponsorship. If you go back to the Immigration Act, one of the primary purposes of this act, I think it's Section 3, says it's to unite families in Canada. Well, people have been getting married and sponsoring spouses or their children from time immemorial. That's not going to stop. I don't see it stopping, right? Even if government changes policy, I think it's if you want to use your term, recession proof, right?
So,
I
so
Go
yeah,
ahead.
so when you say family, like, so what kinds of stuff from the family that comes into immigration?
Mostly spouses and then people sponsoring their children, right? What I'm seeing a lot of with spousals now is that so one spouse, the Canadian permanent resident or citizen, is sponsoring their spouse who has children of their own under age 22. And what they do is they sponsor their spouse first, and then when their spouse gets landed, they sponsor their children. And this is what one of my clients said to me. She said, Carl, this isn't my first rodeo. I've sponsored a spouse in the past. That marriage didn't work out, but she was well educated on her responsibilities. So she said, I can sponsor my spouse and his dependent child. And if we split up tomorrow, I still have that financial obligation to that child who isn't mine for 10 years or to age 25, whichever comes first. So that's what I'm seeing quite a bit of. So people are educating themselves, which is good,
Okay, so let's maybe do a more straightforward spousal sponsorship where there's none all those issues.
right?
So what happens, right? I mean, obviously, in a paralegal realm, right, that you can't do the initial application. So what are some of the reasons that can be rejected? And then how can you come in on the appeal to, I mean, let's start there. Like, what are some of the reasons when people are submitting these forms that they are rejected um, by the visa officers?
Well, you said something very interesting there about when they're submitting these forms. A lot of what I call the do-it-yourself applicants who get these refusals, that is exactly the problem. They're just filling in and submitting forms. And there's a lot more to a successful application than filling in a form. It is actually presenting the case. Well, at the end of the day, the visa officer is only concerned about one thing. Is this relationship genuine? And as a follow-up to that, we want to make sure that this relationship was not entered into for immigration or any other improper purpose.
So
Right?
how do you show that if again, I mean, yes, there's going to be cases where they are rightfully flagging ones where it is for thwarting the immigration process or it's not a genuine relationship, but what about times where it's the opposite, right, where it is a genuine relationship but for whatever reason, as you said, the do-it-yourselfers, they don't go into detail, they don't provide
They,
some of
they
their
don't they don't provide the evidence or sufficient evidence to back up the relationship. When I talk to a lot of folks who are common law, right, I say to them, hey, listen, the only difference between your relationship, when we're looking at it, between your relationship and that of a married person is married people have a certificate of marriage. You don't. But other than that, right? As a matter of fact, as common law, you're probably going to come under more scrutiny. So you have to provide that evidence to show you still have to do the things that married people do and demonstrate that with documentation.
So Carl, if someone's unsuccessful, right? So all of these reasons there, they do it themselves, whatever the issues might be.
Sometimes
What
they
ha
have representation and it's still not done properly. And
Okay,
they,
so even representation's not a
yeah.
guarantee. Then what happens when they get the news, what can they do next?
Okay, so they have 15 days to apply for judicial review, and you can pretty much only apply if you can demonstrate error in law or error in fact. Um, and you have 15 days to do that. And you need a lawyer for that because that's federal court. Or if it's an outside Canada spousal, you can appeal to the Immigration Appeal Division. If it's inside Canada, meaning you are living in Canada with your spouse who isn't a Canadian, there's no appeal.
Okay, so that's just to clarify that point. So if somebody is a Canadian citizen, maybe they in their paralegal class there was an international student, they spend 2 years together and then they propose and get married and now they want them to be sponsored. If they're rejected, you're saying they can't go to the immigration appeal division because they're
No,
both in Canada.
right. And the reason for that, I've always been told, it just goes against public policy. That's it. I've never gotten a logical reason why.
Okay, so then the other opportunity then, or the only opportunity for people in that relation in that circumstance, is that if after they finish their studies, their permit expires, so they return back to their home country. They're married, they got married, right? But they're not able to become permanent residents until this application is processed. So in that case, they're back in their home country. The Canadian citizen is still here. They filled out the paperwork. They've applied, they did it themselves, or even they had a representation, whatever, there were some mistakes made. It's rejected. 15 days expires, or they don't go the judicial review route. Um, what happens then at the
Well, they have
immigration?
30 days. If it's an outside Canada application, they have 30 days to appeal to the IAD. The first step, you file your notice of appeal, right?
Okay, and what would you put in the notice of appeal? What are you going to say to the IAD?
Well, we're basically telling them, hey, you know what? We think you're wrong, right? So you complete the notice of appeal form, right? And submit that with a copy of the IRCC refusal letter.
And then what happens after that in terms of the process?
So after that, you start, if you are, if you have representation, certainly your representative is going to start preparing your case, right? So, I mean, and by preparing the case, I mean putting together everything that addresses the officer's concerns as to why they refused the application in the first place.
So can you make me an example then of like what's something that the officer could have raised? How can you then address it in your preparation for the appeal?
And the officer could have simply said, they're they're they suspect this relationship was entered into for the purpose of immigration, right? So let me give you an example of one I came across. So you have someone that came here, they apply for refugee, that failed, then they try HNC, that failed, and then 2 months later, all of a sudden they're in love and they got married and they submit a spousal. No, that relationship may be genuine, but you have to admit now you're gonna have to provide some serious evidence to convince an officer that this relationship is genuine and not entered into for improper purposes. And I've come across some genuine ones. Believe it or not, there's a guy detained by CBSA, and he has been living with his common law partner for 3 years and never understood what common law partner meant. So she's the one who actually was his bonds person to bail him out of CBSA detention. And I'm like, why aren't you sponsoring him? I'm like, oh, we thought we had to be married. So sometimes it's ignorance.
Yeah, and that's certainly interesting whether you're here or not here about the access to some of the information. But in terms of that, I mean, one of the things, and no, I've certainly discussed it with students as well in immigration classes, is we're in 2025, right? And what is the stereotypical definition, as you said, some people in the past, right, you would get married, you'd have the ceremony, you would have a courting period and all of that, right? But today it's very different, right? I mean, a lot of relationships, I think see the graphic, most people are meeting online, right? So if you're a visa officer, how are you try to assess genuineness, right? I mean, yes, you gave an example where they tried this, they tried that, and then suddenly they fell in love and trying a different way to get status in Canada. But how do you kind of compare that, like in terms of how is this a genuine relationship when you don't
I
have a
can't tell you
traditional?
for sure, but one thing I do know, relationships under 2 years getting a lot of scrutiny. Right now, it doesn't have to be marriages, it can be relationships. And I said relationships for this reason. Because I've had clients who they have been common law for 2 years, 3 years, application goes in and then they get married. Well, immigration isn't just looking at, oh, you just got married. No, we're looking at the relationship because the relationship is the foundation of whatever it is. That's what they're looking at.
And so how can you show sort of stronger relationships, right? I mean, even if time passes, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a relationship there, right? I mean, is it as simple as show us your communications, like your WhatsApp conversations or
Well, if the person is
pictures?
outside the country, well, one of the things we want to see is how many times did you travel to see them? Right? That so your boarding passes, stuff like that, people don't think of because the document checklist won't necessarily tell you, hey, do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And not only that, things that are on the document checklist aren't necessarily all you need to prove a relationship is genuine either.
And so after you kind of look at that and whatever those issues might have been raised, if you are able to fix that, are you then able to kind of go in pre-hearing to the representative on the other side and say, look, you flag the visa officer flagged it for these reasons. Um, Here's what we've provided in response to it. Is that sometimes enough to then grant
Well,
the
I think what you're talking about is ADR. So even before we have a hearing, you have a little informal sit down with the minister's council. Um, I've never done one where ADR was involved. Alternative. So in other words, we're resolving it and we don't have a hearing then. Like, yeah, we agree or we don't, right? Or we resolve it before you even get to a hearing. Yes, they can do that, but if that doesn't work, then they'll schedule a hearing where you present your client's case.
and how is that hearing like then? I mean, is it different? Do you hear, is the minister's council going to start cross-examining and be like, do you know where Lori's toothbrush is or whatever, right?
So the
To
minister's counsel can ask questions. So can the member. So, I guess from a court perspective, the member would be like the decision maker, like a judge, where the judge doesn't ask questions in court, right? Here, the member who is making the decision can ask questions. And you can call witnesses as well.
is there, it would be like friends and family that you would call to sort of speak to the genuineness of the relationship or,
Yes, or sometimes it could be their pastor, sometimes it could be somebody from, if there are kids involved, the kids' school.
and are there, I guess, questions in terms of how well you know each other? Like, I mean, is it things like that that they can prepare with? Um, it's like a dating show. How well do you know this common law partner or your spouse?
Oh,
What's
well,
there to it?
there are things that a lot of people don't think of, right? They just don't think of them. Stuff like, yeah, I do have my spouse on my benefits at work. Oh, yeah, well, that's what married people or people in committed relationships tend to do. Give me that evidence. Things like that, right? Joint bank accounts, um, things to show you're at the same address. So even if they're we have our driver's licenses, they should be matching up, same address, things like that. Common everyday things that married people do.
And so then what happens? How long typically then after we go through that process, you ask the right questions, you get all the information. How long do you get a decision kind of on the spot, or is it they're reserving judgment for a period of time? Does it depend?
Well, if they allow your appeal, right, what they're going to do is they're pretty much overturning the refusal, right?
And so does that mean you get your permanent residency like almost then and there, and you can?
Well, not then and there on the spot, but that's pretty much it. The appeal process is over, and if they allow your appeal, you're good to go. You're gonna get landed. Now, if it's dismissed, right? Now you're looking at federal court, so
Now
you need
you
a lawyer there.
now you mentioned
15 days.
before about if you're no, and this is only for those who are out of the country, right, that have this option. But is there logic in doing the appeal versus just reapplying with now hire this time I'll hire an immigration consultant or a lawyer to do the form. We just rushed it ourselves. We didn't know what we had to do. Now we see the errors in our way. Is there pros and cons with whichever choice? I mean, assuming you don't miss the deadlines, obviously, of 30 days, is the appeal usually the better route, or is reapplying a better route?
Well, one of the first things I like to do is I like to get a copy of the file. So if they had a previous representative or if they self-rep, I want to see everything that they sent in to the IRCC. Right? Well, in Canada, you can't appeal anyway, right? But certainly if you have a refusal outside Canada, yes, I'm going to appeal. If I see grounds for an appeal, yes, I wouldn't reapply.
And timing or processing time, do you know the difference? I mean, I guess it depends on the country, but processing time for the appeal. So if we go all the way full circle to where we started talking about this, within that 30-day window, how long between then and perhaps getting to a hearing and having a decision, or is that kind of still in flux post-COVID?
Yeah, this is my position on all processing times. Doesn't matter what it is. These days, there is no rhyme nor reason to it. Let me give you an example. If you spoke to me 3 weeks ago, I would tell you that an in Canada spousal is taking you 36 months to be processed. As of last week, it's 23 months. Now, a year ago, it was about 16 months. So I will tell you this about all processing times. There's no rhyme nor reason to it. I can't tell you.
Now, for paralegals, right? What are other? I mean, I know you mentioned you don't do refugee matters, or Lori tends to take those, but what are the reasons then? Um, to look at immigration because a lot of times we're hearing, look, well, I can't do the initial spousal sponsorship, which you can as a dual licensee.
Mhm.
I can't do the student visas. I can't do the express entry applications, right? So should I even bother with immigration law? So now I know you kind of touched on this earlier, but what are kind of things that they can build on and certainly focus on within their scope, besides the spousal sponsorships that we've gone over in detail here.
Well, you can't look at immigration or, in my view, anything in a vacuum, right? Now, I'm a marketer, so I am always thinking, okay, um, all right, I've been in insurance so long, so I guess an insurance example might make a little more sense. I used to do home, auto, life, business insurance, but car insurance was what got me in the door. Everybody wanted to insure their car. And once I got into your house, now I have access to all the other rooms in your house to take care of other needs you have. And I'm saying that to say this, right? Whatever your client needs that you can take care of as a paralegal, who do you think they're going to come back to for other legal services? So let's take to get off topic a little, notary services. Lori and I are notarizing like crazy. But you know what it does? It opens us up to questions about other legal services that we may or may not be able to offer. So you don't make money notarizing documents, but they'll talk to you and say, "Hey, what about this?" I'm like, "Hey, that's outside of my scope, but I have a lawyer for you." Or if it's within your scope, so you can't look at immigration or any area of law in a vacuum. You have to look at it. Take care of that need for the client because they'll have other needs. And not only that, referrals for you. So that's what I would say. That's why it makes sense. I take some cases not about the money. It's about how can I help the client. I went to CBSA this morning. Um, And I decided to go this morning. The guy called me at 8 o'clock and he was in tears and he was scared to death. And I'm glad I went because if I didn't go, he would have made the wrong decision. That satisfaction of helping people is huge for me. And what I realized um, is the the position that we are in as paralegals to help people and grow our practice by helping people. It's the greatest thing. You know, 9 years ago when I walked into Roy Kellogg's office and I said, "Hey, I want to be, if you take me as an intern, field placement." And he said, if you want to learn to just fill in forms, get the hell out of my office. But if you want to be an advocate and help people and make a living ethically, he said, sit down. And he was blunt like that. And I sat down. So we can't just focus on one area of law and said, hey, well, I can't do applications, so therefore I don't want to do appeals or I don't want. Wrong approach. Wrong approach. I can barely spell the word refugee, but I get a lot of phone calls about it and I'm passing it on to people who do it and people who are good at it.
So, Carl, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. Thanks for sharing that passion there. And again, it is something as well I talked with Lori a couple days ago is that you can't just solely rely on people kind of giving you those handouts, right? You got to put in that sweat equity yourself as a newly licensed paralegal or even a long-time licensed paralegal to look at how to build those opportunities. And there's many mentors, as you said, there's many coaches, there's many people who want to see you succeed, but you also have to make sure yourself that you're taking those steps to succeed. And on that, I was wondering maybe if you can conclude with any final words of wisdom for any paralegal student or newly licensed paralegal or anyone listening that you can share from your experience. Any words of wisdom and advice. And thanks so much again for joining us.
Well, I would just say, um, figure out what it is you're passionate about and what you want to do, and then find someone who is already doing and doing it well and let them mentor you. That's what I suggest.
Perfect. So thanks again, Carl, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Have a
Thank you,
great rest of the
JP.
evening. Take care,
Okay,
everyone.
cheers.